My name is Lily Morgan. I'm 35 years old, living and working in Boston. I'm a financial specialist for a nonprofit organization, living simply in a small apartment near the lake, cooking my own meals, paying every bill myself. But that evening, just a few hours before Thanksgiving, I received a text from my younger sister. Don't come anymore. Dad says you're no longer in the will. I didn't cry. I didn't get angry. I simply opened my laptop, scrolled to the file titled Property Ownership, Morgan Residence, the house where they were living, the house where I grew up, the house where they had just erased me from the family dinner, in reality had been under my name for over a year. I bought that house back when I learned my parents were drowning in tax debt. I never told anyone. I never needed thanks. I just wanted my mother not to endure another freezing winter. But in return, I was cut out of the will. Because I didn't cook the turkey? Have you ever been cast aside by your own family the moment they no longer needed you? Leave a comment below if you've ever felt forgotten in your own home. Hit like if you believe everyone deserves respect. And subscribe to the channel to hear the rest of this story, where silence itself would become the alarm my whole family never expected. The story begins the moment I chose not to show up for dinner, but left them eating in a house that no longer belonged to them. I was born into a picture-perfect traditional family. My father had been a Marine officer, retired early after a knee injury. My mother stayed at home full-time, caring for him and us 3 children. They lived in an old 2-story house in the southern suburbs of Boston, where everything was orderly, quiet, and arranged according to my father's rules. I was the eldest daughter. But in that house, I was never called the big sister. That title always belonged to Rachel, my younger sister, though she was 3 years younger than me. Rachel had big eyes, blonde hair, a dazzling smile like something from a holiday greeting card. And me? I was quiet, always with a book, finishing homework while Rachel twirled around the living room blasting music. I don't remember if there was cake on my 10th birthday. I only remember it rained, and I lay on my bed reading a Nancy Drew book while Rachel squealed downstairs because Mom let her taste ice cream before dinner. 3 months later, Rachel's birthday was held at an Italian restaurant. Dad booked a private room, with balloons, printed invitations, even a 3-tier cake. My father lifted his wine glass, fork raised like a speechmaker. To Rachel, the joy of this family. I sat in the corner, biting my lip to swallow down cold spaghetti. I got used to that uneven balance. Rachel was always the sensitive one, the dreamer, while I was the responsible one, the child who never caused trouble. By the time I was 12, I already knew how to do my own laundry, clean Rachel's room when Mom said she was too tired, and make warm milk for Mom whenever she couldn't sleep. No one asked me to. But when I did, no one thanked me either. In college, I earned a full scholarship to a finance school in Boston. I didn't visit home often, not because I was angry, but because it felt unnecessary. Every Sunday I still called. My mother always answered first. Are you eating enough? Yes, I am. When are you coming home? Probably a few days at New Year's. Then she'd hand the phone to Rachel, who would usually say something like, "Is it fun there? Bet your place is boring." She never waited for me to answer. The summer I graduated, I landed my first job at an insurance company. The starting salary wasn't high, but it was steady. I remember that first paycheck so clearly. While friends went downtown to celebrate, I went home, sat under the desk lamp, and wrote out a small check to my parents, $200 for utilities, even though no one had asked me. That time, Mom called me back. "You don't have to send anything, we'll manage." But in her voice, there was a relief as clear as the sound of water draining from a sink. From then on, I sent money every month. Sometimes more, sometimes less. No one reminded me, and no one thanked me. Only when I skipped 1 month because my account had been temporarily frozen after a banking glitch, did my father text me bluntly, "Is something wrong? Gas bill due next week." When my mother had a mild stroke at my age of 28, I was the first one to rush to the hospital. I took 3 days off work, handled the paperwork, found a specialist. Rachel was in Vermont with her boyfriend. She came home 2 days later, and when she did, she cried so loudly the whole ward turned to look. I was in the hallway, paying the bill. When I stepped into the room with the receipt in hand, Rachel clung to me, sobbing like the star of a soap opera. "Lily, I was so scared." I said nothing. I handed Mom her water, tucked in her blanket, and sat quietly in the chair. Dad placed his hand on Rachel's shoulder. "She's so fragile. Poor girl." I looked at that hand on her shoulder, remembering when that same hand had gripped my wrist tightly, telling me I had to give up summer camp at 13 to stay home and watch Rachel. Back then, I just nodded. I never blamed my sister. Rachel was simply raised to believe the world revolved around her. And I was raised to revolve around her too. When Rachel applied for graduate school, she chose a prestigious program with tuition that was sky high. My parents couldn't afford it, Dad said. "Then she'll just take a year off to work." But one late night, Mom called me, her voice trembling. "Sweetheart, if you could help Rachel just a little." I had just finished paying off my own student loans. My account was nearly zero. But I nodded. I wired Rachel $2,500. She texted back just 3 words. "Got it." No explanation. No thanks. 3 years later, she held her master's diploma, posing with our parents on the school lawn, while I watched through my phone. They hadn't invited me. Rachel said, "You're too far away, you wouldn't make it." I never told anyone that I had paid her first semester's tuition so she could start on time. I never asked for it back. I just kept the receipt, filed away under Family, Private. Now, whenever I look back at those files, I don't feel hurt anymore. I just see clearly. In that family, I didn't exist as a daughter, but as a shadow, a pillar holding up the house one everyone assumed would never break. I grew used to living without praise. But over time, I realized one thing. When people don't see how much you're carrying, they'll keep piling more on your shoulders until you disappear. And they still. I believe you're standing there. And maybe that's why, when I was erased from Thanksgiving dinner, I wasn't surprised. I simply opened the file titled Property Ownership, Morgan Residence, and stared at the truth. The very people who crossed my name off the guest list were living in the house I had quietly bought back with all the devotion they had never once noticed. A year ago, I had still gone home for Thanksgiving, bringing a homemade apple pie I baked the night before. I stood for hours in my tiny apartment kitchen, using the handwritten recipe Mom had taught me back in middle school. When the pie turned golden and the scent of cinnamon filled the room, I imagined the moment Mom would smile and say, "You still make the best pies." But when I walked into the old house on Ashwood Street, the first thing I saw was a dining table set in perfect formality, golden light shining on china that was rarely used. And at the center of it all stood Rachel, beaming in a velvet red dress, holding a glass of white wine, chatting with guests I had never met. I was about to say hello when my mother stepped out of the kitchen, still holding a pot of sauce. "Lily, you came just in time. I need you to wash some baking trays in the back," she said quickly, then turned away as if I were just a late housemaid. I stood still for a second, looking around the table. No one turned to greet me. Not a single chair was left empty. No one asked, "Lily, you're home?" I walked into the kitchen, set the apple pie on the counter, and rolled up my sleeves. Almost an hour later, I was still scrubbing a burnt pan, grease hardened like stone under freezing water. My mother hadn't turned on the hot water because the gas bill was too high last month. Laughter from the dining room drifted in. I heard Rachel's excited voice, and then I planned to open a small art class, something creative and relaxing. There's a group of investors interested. My father sat at the head of the table. I saw him through the crack of the kitchen door, nodding as if listening to a CEO's pitch. When I stepped out to fetch more plates, my father looked at me once. "Help your mother clean up, all right? You don't need to stand out, just be useful." I froze, holding a stack of cold dishes. A few guests glanced at me, then turned back to their meals as if I were a server who had forgotten a uniform. That night, I slept on the sofa. My old room had become Rachel's storage. As I lay facing the backrest, I heard Rachel's voice through the opposite room. bragging about her boyfriend buying her a new camera, about art centers offering her exhibition space. Near midnight, my mother knocked softly on the living room door. "Are you able to sleep?" I nodded. She sat down at the edge of the sofa, her hand resting gently on my shoulder. "Don't think too much, Lily. You're the one who understands everything in this family. I know you don't need attention to be happy." I turned my face into the pillow, afraid she would see the corners of my eyes already wet. The next morning, I woke early, tidied the kitchen, and packed leftovers to take home. Rachel was still asleep. My father never came out of his room. Only my mother walked me to the door. "Be careful. The city streets are slippery this time of year." I turned back to look at the house one last time. Winter sunlight touched the steps covered in dry leaves. That was when I saw a paper stuck to the mailbox. "Property tax delinquency notice. Third warning." I froze. They had already received 2 prior warnings? My mother quickly pulled me toward the car. "It's nothing. I can handle it." But I knew she was lying. I remembered the way her eyes darted away, the slight tremor in her dry hands as she opened the car door for me. I said nothing, only nodded. But when I returned to my apartment, I immediately searched the city's property records, and I saw everything. The house was listed for seizure if full payment wasn't made within 120 days. Total debt plus penalties came to over $17,000. I couldn't sleep that night. Images haunted me. My mother's trembling hands in the kitchen, the cold sofa, my father's indifferent look, his words, "You don't need to stand out, just be useful." Then I called Ben, my college friend, now a real estate lawyer. I sent him the property number, asked him to check, and asked directly, "If I want to quietly buy that house, is there a way?" Ben was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Yes, but are you sure?" I answered, "It's not because I want to take anything. I just can't let the house be seized and my mother thrown out. But I also don't want them to think I exist only to rescue them." Ben sent me the files, guided me through the steps, and within 3 weeks, I held the deed to the house. I used nearly all my savings, plus the small inheritance from my grandfather that I had once planned to use for my own place. No one knew. No conversations, no announcements. I paid the taxes, covered the furnace repairs, and arranged for all future bills to be redirected to a private P.O. box, and I left everything else the same. No rent, no notes. I didn't need them to know. I only needed my mother not to wash dishes in freezing water anymore. But a year later, on the night before Thanksgiving, I got a text from Rachel. "Don't come anymore. Dad says you're no longer in the will." I didn't reply. I just opened my laptop, pulled up the file, property deed, Morgan residence, and stared at the signature at the bottom. Not Charles Morgan, not Linda, not Rachel, but me, Lily Morgan, sole owner. I poured myself a cup of hot tea, sat quietly by the window. Outside, the first snow of the season drifted down, light as breath. And I thought, if someone is erased from the table inside the very house she owns, what does that say? Not about them, about me. I didn't need to stand out, but maybe it was time to stop being useful in silence. I used to think buying a house was a grand event, with flowers, ribbons, champagne at closing, at least a few congratulations. But when I became the owner of the house my family still lived in, none of that happened. No party, no smiles. Just a cold December afternoon, me signing papers Ben handed over, as quietly as if signing for a package. I remember my hand trembling slightly on the pen, not from fear, but from knowing that signature would change everything, at least for me. Ben glanced at me. "You're sure?" I nodded. "Not going to tell them?" "Not yet, as long as they have shelter through the winter, especially my mother." Ben stayed quiet. He was never one to press for details. He only needed to know I had thought it through. And I had ever since I saw that notice on the mailbox. Over $17,000 in back taxes, penalties piled up over 3 years. The house where I learned to read, arrange flowers, mop wooden floors in winter. now one step away from public auction. When I asked Ben if there was a way to keep it without crushing my family's pride, he said, "There is. But you need to move fast. Otherwise, the house will be on the auction list in 3 weeks." I scrambled together nearly 10 years of savings. I withdrew my grandfather's inheritance, the money I had always imagined using for my own place. He passed when I was 24, the only one who ever called me the smartest girl he'd ever known. He left me a modest sum, not much, but enough to remind me that at least one person had believed in my worth without me having to prove it. Ben handled the paperwork. We worked directly with the city's tax office. Because the house was in long-term delinquency, they allowed me to pay in full and transfer ownership if I cleared the balance within 5 days. We chose the quietest option. I rented a P.O. box nearly 30 miles away for all bills and notices. Everything funneled there, beyond my family's sight. Within 2 weeks, I was listed as sole owner of the Ashwood Street property. And my family kept living inside, unaware, still decorating the porch with pine every holiday, still complaining about the furnace each time the wind shifted. I quietly paid the monthly utility bills through a separate account. I logged each expense into an Excel file. I titled, "Maintenance Costs for Mom." I never thought of it as a sacrifice. For me, it was the last act I could do for the woman who once walked nearly 2 miles just to buy me a white shirt for my first high school presentation. I visited home less, partly from work, partly from feeling out of place. Rachel showed up more often, even posting photos of family dinners online captioned, "The place that always feels like home." I saw one scrolling through my phone on a train ride. In it, my father grinned wide. My mother looked at Rachel with affection. I didn't see my apple pie. I didn't see myself. Ben asked me once, as we had lunch near his office, "You've done all this, asking for nothing. Doesn't it exhaust you?" I smiled. "It does, but I don't do it for them. I do it so I won't regret it, if one day that house is gone and my mother has nowhere to go." Ben rested his hand on his coffee cup. "If the day ever comes when you change your mind, just let me know. The house contract is in your name. You have full authority." I wasn't planning to change my mind. Not then. But on the night before Thanksgiving, when I received Rachel's text, I knew everything had shifted. "Don't come anymore. Dad says you're no longer in the will." Just 12 words, no explanation. No emotion. As if I were just a line in a spreadsheet someone had deleted to make space. I read the message 3 times. Each time felt different. The first time, it stung. The second time, it felt hollow. The third time, it was strangely quiet. I rose from the table, poured more tea, opened my laptop, logged into my personal property account, and scrolled down to the fixed assets section. The name appeared, clear as a final confirmation. Owner, Lily Morgan. I pulled up the expense sheet. Each month, each bill, each transfer lined up neatly like tiles across a path. The house they lived in, the house they believed was theirs. It existed because I had kept it, and the one who had erased me from the family dinner was the very one who had never paid a dime to keep it standing. I looked out the window. Snow was beginning to fall softly. Flakes touched the frozen glass, melting slowly, as if they too needed time to accept winter. I had no intention of taking anything back. But inside me, something had shifted, light but certain, like a chess match reaching the endgame, and I was the one holding the last knight. I reread Rachel's message, just to be. I'm sure I hadn't misread it. "Don't come. You make everything tense. Dad says you're cut from the will." No question mark. No greeting. Not a hint of hesitation. I sat in the wooden chair by the window, desk lamp casting light on my hand holding the phone, trembling slightly. But I wasn't angry. My chest didn't tighten like before. My cheeks didn't burn the way they used to when I was dismissed. Instead, there was an unfamiliar stillness, like morning fog lying heavy over a lake, indistinct, but covering everything. I set the phone down, opened my laptop again. The screen lit up with the Boston Property Records page. I logged in, scrolled to personal assets. My name, Lily Morgan appeared once more, letter for letter. Beside it, the status line read, active, property tax paid in full. I clicked the PDF file transfer contract Ben had sent after signing. Every signature was there. The county's seal, the file number, the property ID, the Ashwood Street address, the house where they had just struck me from the dinner table, like removing an entree from a menu. I lowered the window and looked out at the street, snow already gathering on car rooftops. Every year, on the night before Thanksgiving, I would sit in my tiny kitchen peeling apples, preparing a pie to bring home. Always apple cinnamon because that was what Mom once praised. Every year the same, even though no one ever really waited for me. But this year, I wasn't peeling apples. I wasn't baking pie. I didn't set my alarm for the early bus to the suburbs. I just sat there, staring at the computer screen, remembering every month I had paid their utility bills. Remembering how I had fought to keep that roof over them, in silence, so no one would freeze, so Mom wouldn't lose sleep over mounting debt. I had believed that if I worked quietly, affection would naturally fill in the gaps. But now I understood. Some people aren't lacking love, they're lacking decency. I pulled a sheet of paper from the drawer, jotting down February 15th, gas payment. March 27th, plumbing repair. May 11th, air conditioning bill paid. Those numbers weren't just money, they were each time I placed family above myself. I wrote them down not to remind them, but to remind me that I had been there, that I had existed. My phone lit up again, a message from Mom. Rachel says you won't be coming. Is that true? Your father's a bit tense, but everyone still wants you here. I stared at the screen, not angry, not softened, just a slow release of the last threads of expectation inside me. I replied, I'll stay in Boston. This year I want quiet. Mom never wrote back. I rose, poured myself a cup of hot tea, and sat in the old upholstered chair by the window. Outside, the streetlights cast a pale glow across the fresh snow, soft as faded memories. I pulled the wool blanket up to my neck and put on the familiar jazz playlist. The saxophone sounded light as breath. I closed my eyes, and I didn't think about the crowded table. I didn't think about the noisy kitchen. I thought only of the warmth of my apartment, where I turned on the heater myself, bought every item myself, chose peace that cost me nothing. I had once believed I had to show up, do everything, to be called part of the family. But now I understood. A crowded table doesn't need another body. It only needs the right one to please them. I wasn't planning revenge, no schemes. But I knew, eventually, they would sit in that house and wonder why the cold seemed to seep deeper than just from outside. And I wouldn't need to say a word. Because cold, sometimes, teaches clearer than any explanation. I folded the note, tucked it inside my old leather notebook. Then I rose, pulled out my warmest sweater, so that if I had to step out for groceries tomorrow, I wouldn't feel the chill. I didn't need a grand dinner. I didn't need my name in the will. Because I already had what no one in my family recognized. A real home, where I could be myself. Not useful, not outstanding, just decent to myself. And this year I would bake an apple pie. But not to bring anywhere. To enjoy alone, in my own kitchen, warm, quiet, the only place that had ever truly welcomed me back. On Thanksgiving morning, I woke before dawn. No alarm clock, no traffic outside, just the pale light of a cold day across the glass, and the steady hum of the heater in the corner. I got up, pulled on a thick gray sweater, walked barefoot across the cold but clean wooden floor. The kitchen was still neat from the night before. I brewed a strong cup of coffee and set an old jazz record on the shelf. The smooth tones of Louis Armstrong filled the small space, touching every corner of silence. I sliced a few Granny Smith apples, mixed them with brown sugar and cinnamon, added a bit of butter, and slid them into the oven. As the warm scent spread, I pulled the wicker chair by the window, sipping coffee, letting myself sink fully into the moment, no rush, no duty, no sense of being forgotten. I didn't think about the Ashwood Street house, where tonight they were surely setting the same old feast. I didn't bother guessing who would carve the turkey, or whether Mom remembered the mashed potatoes I used to love. I knew well, my name would not be in any blessing at that table, and I didn't need it. By 11 o'clock, the apple pie was golden, crust puffed crisp and fragrant. I set it on the table, cut 2 small slices, one for lunch, one for later. No fancy setup, just a plain porcelain plate and a faded floral napkin I had found in a thrift store last month. My phone lay face down on the table. No calls, no messages. I wasn't waiting for anything. But across the city, in the house that once belonged to my family, things weren't so peaceful. I didn't know the exact moment the power went out, but according to the billing schedule, I had logged. The electric company had sent 3 warnings since the start of the month, demanding the remaining balance of just over $200. I had always kept the payments on auto debit through my own account, but last month, I disconnected it. It wasn't a surprise. I hadn't done it out of anger. Only because I thought if I was no longer considered part of the family, then I didn't need to keep playing the invisible one. When the lights shut off that afternoon, right as Rachel was standing at the table mid-sentence about her children's art studio plans, the room fell into darkness. Only the faint ticking of the gas stove left. As Haley later told me, at first everyone thought it was a technical glitch. My mother fetched candles. My father grumbled about the old wiring, while Rachel, phone in hand, complained, "I can't believe this happened today of all days." Soon, as the house grew colder and the lights never returned, Rachel called me. The call came while I was reading a novel on the table, sipping ginger tea. Her name lit up the screen. Rachel, calling. I didn't touch it. I simply watched the screen flash, then fade. Another call came. Then another. I closed my book, set it on the table. My hand rested on the wooden surface, fingertips brushing the edge of the cold plate. Inside, I felt no waves, no joy, no sadness. Only a strange release, like stepping out of a dark room and shutting the door behind me. The ringing stopped. I flipped the phone back down, face first, as before. Then I stood, cut myself another slice of pie, drizzled honey and cinnamon on top. In my small apartment, the heater hummed steadily. Warm light filled the kitchen, and I felt no need to explain anything anymore. I knew Rachel wasn't calling because she missed me. Not because she wanted me back. She called because things weren't running the way they used to. She called because, for the first time, I wasn't there to quietly fix the chaos someone else had created. My mother was likely trembling in the dark kitchen, still trying to boil water on the gas stove. My father, probably on the phone with the electric company, frustrated and confused about not receiving any notice. Rachel, perhaps trying to hook her phone to the neighbor's Wi-Fi to post her complaints online. And me? I sat back down at the table, wrapped the remaining pie in foil, and carefully placed it in the fridge. Then I wrote a few lines in the notebook I always kept by the heater. Thanksgiving. The first year I didn't go home. Also, the first year I didn't feel empty. I closed the notebook and set it under the desk lamp, where the light glowed gently, like the warmth of an old friend. Outside the window, snow was falling heavier. But in my room, every finger was warm, every breath steady, and there was nothing left to wait for. I hadn't expected I could sit through an entire Thanksgiving afternoon in silence, no rushing, no checking the clock, no wondering what they were doing at the old house. But while I was watering the lavender pot on the balcony, I knew, somehow, that the first cracks had already begun to fall. Almost a week later, while I was standing in line at the grocery store, I received a text from Haley, my cousin on my mother's side, the only one who had kept in touch with me all these years. "Brace yourself. Uncle Charles just discovered a big truth. Things are turning upside down." I didn't reply right away. I went home, brewed a warm cup of tea, and only then called Haley back. Her voice was the same as always, quick, direct, yet gentle. "Here's what happened," she began. "Last week, Uncle Charles got an envelope from the city. At first, he thought it was junk mail, so he set it aside. But yesterday, he opened it. It was a property ownership confirmation. Current owner, Lily Morgan." I said nothing. Haley exhaled. sounding like she wasn't sure whether to laugh or keep quiet. He brought that letter over to Mr. Whitaker's house to ask, "You remember him, right? The neighbor next door to the old house." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Mr. Whitaker was the only neighbor who had ever spoken to me when I visited years ago. His wife had passed away early, and he lived alone, but always kept a warm presence. Every time I came back, he would say, "Lily, long time no see. You doing okay?" Not many words, but enough to make me feel not entirely invisible. Haley went on. Mr. Whitaker looked at the letter and said just one sentence. "I think you should talk to Lily. I saw her name on the paperwork last month." I could picture my father's face when he heard that. He had always been the one in control of money, of words spoken in the house. Anything he didn't know made him feel betrayed. Uncle Charles went home, dug through the old cabinet, and pulled out a stack of bills. And then, sure enough, there was one electric bill, bottom corner marked, "Payer, Lily Morgan." I stayed silent. Those bills were supposed to have gone to the private P.O. box I rented, but apparently one had slipped through to the old address, and he hadn't noticed until someone else pointed it out. Haley hesitated. He's furious, but doesn't know who to be furious at. Last night, Rachel and Aunt Linda had a big fight. Aunt Linda said, "We should have talked to Lily long ago," and Rachel screamed, "She did this for revenge." I laughed quietly. Revenge? If I had wanted revenge, I wouldn't have kept that house warm for 2 years without a single word of thanks. I wouldn't have silently paid the gas bill in mid-January, knowing Mom got up early to cook porridge on the gas stove because the kitchen heater was broken. "I don't know what they'll do next," Haley said. "But I just wanted you to know, because I think they're going to try to see you," I said softly. "Thanks for telling me." Straight. After hanging up, I stood by the small kitchen table, hand resting on the chair back. On one side, the old house where I once believed hard work would earn me recognition. On the other side, the present where I had chosen to live my own life without waiting for anyone's approval. I wouldn't make the first move. I would let them come when they were truly ready to see me as a person, not as a walking wallet. 3 days later, on a windy Saturday afternoon, I received a call from the landline, the old house number. I let it ring to the third tone before answering. "Hello," I said calmly. My father's voice came through, dry, slow, as if forcing control over every word. "Lily, I want to talk." I stayed quiet. On the other end, he continued, "I got the letter. About the house ownership." I still said nothing. He cleared his throat. "Why did you do it without saying anything?" I exhaled slowly. "Do you want to talk about me keeping a roof over the family while being erased from the will, or about not being invited to Thanksgiving dinner so I wouldn't make things tense?" His voice sank. I didn't think it would go this far. "No," I cut in. "You didn't think, you assumed, because in this family, I've never been the first one you thought of." Silence hung for several seconds. Then he spoke softly. "I saw your name on the papers." That moment, I remembered. Last January, your mother mentioned someone had paid the heating bill. I thought it was Rachel. I gave a small laugh, not mocking, just cold. Rachel hasn't paid a single bill in 3 years. But she's in every family photo. And I'm not. He didn't argue. "Lily," he finally said, "I want to see you." I didn't answer right away. I looked out the window, the maple tree on my balcony almost bare of leaves. Then I said gently, "If you truly want to see me, you can come. But I won't sit quietly as the good daughter, while someone preaches about family above all anymore. This time, if you want to talk, I'll talk too." He was silent for a long time, then only said, "All right." I hung up. Outside, the wind blew harder. But inside, I wasn't shaken. Because I knew they would have to step through the door not to command, but to ask to be heard. And that was something that had never happened before. That morning, frost still fogged the window when I heard the doorbell echo in the stillness of early winter. Not loud, not hurried, not forceful, just short, hesitant rings, as if the person outside wasn't sure how long to stand there. I rose from the table, closed the notebook where I had been jotting a few lines of work, and walked slowly toward the door. Through the narrow glass panel, I saw the figure of a man in an old knit cap, thick gray coat frayed at the shoulders, eyes sunken from lack of sleep, gripping a canvas bag strapped tightly. It was him. My father. I opened the door, but not wide. Cold air rushed through the gap, brushing my coat hem sharp, but not as sharp as the chill radiating from the eyes of the man I had called Dad for 30 years. He stood there, lips cracked, eyes hollow, staring at me but as if searching for another anchor point beyond me. "Can we talk?" he asked, voice rasping, softer than I remembered. I nodded, pushed the door open a little more, stepped aside to let him in, not welcoming, not cold, just without pretense. I no longer felt the need to play any role. He walked in, steps heavy. I pointed to the small kitchen table with 2 chairs. "Sit." I poured myself a cup of tea, not asking if he wanted anything. Not to be rude, but to make him feel this space had grown used to solitude, and he was a stranger passing through a life he had once left behind. He set the canvas bag on the table, sat upright, hands clasped together, quiet for a long moment, then he spoke. "Your mother, she's weak now. Since the blackout, she's been coughing, can't sleep at night. The doctor says she needs complete rest, no stress. And Rachel," I cut in. "You don't need to tell me about Rachel." He faltered, then said more clearly, "I want to ask, can you remove your name from the house ownership? With your name on it, she's anxious. I fear she can't take another shock." I looked at him. My eyes held no anger, only clarity, and the weariness of someone who had heard too many excuses built to justify pain. I set the teacup down, fingers still around the handle, and said gently, "Mom deserves kindness, warmth, care, but that, Dad, no longer depends on me. Because the one who chose to cut me out of the family wasn't anyone else, it was you." He breathed hard, shoulders tightening. "That's unfair." "I did it because I don't sacrifice like Rachel?" I asked, looking straight into his eyes. He stopped breathing for a moment, as if I had just pulled away the curtain he'd kept for so long. "That's not what I meant." He shook his head, voice strained. You always did everything alone, without asking, without saying. You'd do it, then disappear. Do it, then stay silent. I never knew where to place you in it all. So you chose to erase me because it was easier to manage?" I said calmly. I pulled a file from the kitchen drawer, prepared in advance. Each document clipped neatly. I set it before him. "Here's the transfer record from 2016 to now. Over 7 years, totaling more than $46,000. Hospital bills for Mom, Rachel's first semester tuition, roof repairs, gas bills, electric bills, even last winter's heating system maintenance." I flipped through each sheet, every page with a clear date and time, every payment with a note. I never said anything because I thought if I helped, I didn't need to take credit. But I was wrong. I was wrong to think silence was noble. I was wrong not to demand the right to exist at my own worth. My father looked down at the file, lips pressed tight. He said nothing for a long time. Then he looked up, eyes red. "I didn't know. I truly didn't know." I nodded lightly. "I know you didn't know. But you also didn't want to know. And that's the deepest wound." He glanced around my small apartment, not luxurious, but warm, clean, filled with the touch of a woman who had built everything herself. A patched armchair. A carefully arranged bookshelf. A small photo of me with Haley and my grandfather on the desk corner. No family photo among them. He was silent for a while before lowering his voice. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I just hope you won't disappear forever." I didn't answer right away. I looked out the window, where a few birds perched on the power lines, trembling in the cold wind. After a moment, I turned back to him. I never disappeared. I just stopped showing up, in places where I wasn't needed. We sat like that for a long time. In the silence, there was no more hatred, only the quiet of 2 people finally daring to look at the truth they had once avoided. And as I stood to brew another pot of tea, I knew maybe it would take a long time for things to ever be called healing, but at least today was the first day I no longer had to stay silent just to exist. A week after meeting with my father, I received a notice from the law office where Ben worked. His voice was steady over the phone, but I caught the faint pause at the end of his sentence. Lily, it looks like your family has refused to sign the lease agreement for the house on Ashwood Street. I sat still in front of my computer screen, staring at the half-finished real estate map. I didn't feel surprised, only a strange sense like an old chapter was about to turn itself to the last page. The city has sent a final notice. If a new lease isn't signed or they don't vacate, within 7 days, the house will be temporarily sealed, Ben explained slowly, carefully, as if he was afraid I wasn't ready to take it in. I didn't answer right away. Outside, light rain had begun to fall. The street below was soaked, the wooden chair on the balcony blotched with dark patches of water. I let out a long breath. I understand, I said softly. Just let everything follow the proper process. 3 days later, on a gray December morning, city employees taped a notice to the front door of the house. I wasn't there, but a neighbor sent me a photo. An orange paper, stamped clearly, temporarily sealed due to termination of legal residency. I enlarged the photo, staring at the familiar doorway. That house had once been full of clinking dishes, the smell of cookies in the air, and the sound of my mother's footsteps moving from the kitchen to the living room. Now it was only an empty frame, a shell of memory already drained. That night I didn't turn. On my phone, I just baked a small banana loaf, brewed chamomile tea, and sat by the window listening to the rain on the roof. But the next morning, when I turned my phone back on, I saw my name at the center of a post spreading across social media. Rachel. A selfie of her, face tear-streaked, eyes red, with the snowy porch behind her. The caption read, "Thrown out of our childhood home by my own blood. We lost everything because of an unfair contract my sister secretly made behind the family's back. Years of raising, years of family bonds, and all that's left now is betrayal." Below were hundreds of comments. At first, sympathetic. Strangers rushing in with pity, harsh words, calling me cold-blooded by name. I read them slowly, my heart calm, though my hands felt cold. Not because of what Rachel wrote, but because of how she chose her words, cutting out the truth as if I had never existed beyond the villain in the story she created. I called Ben. "I've seen it," he said before I could explain. "I'll issue an official response on your behalf. But, do you want me to release all the details? Ownership documents? Bills? Transfer history?" I paused. "Release them, but only what's necessary. No need to expose her. Just let the truth stand tall." 2 days later, Ben's law office page posted a formal statement. It wasn't long, but it was clear, concise, and complete. Our client, Lily Morgan, is the legal owner of the referenced property, obtained properly through the city due to long-standing tax delinquency. Miss Morgan paid the full debt, maintained utilities and property upkeep for over 2 years solely with her own finances, without any contribution from other family members. Bills, legal documents, and payment receipts can be made public if necessary. The post included 3 images: the deed of ownership, a summary of utility and tax payments, and a record of bank transfers from the past 5 years. Within hours, Rachel's post shifted from hundreds of sympathetic comments to sharp questions. "So you lied to play the victim? If Lily hadn't paid, that house would have been taken by the city 2 years ago." Another read, "Honestly, I'm ashamed of people who hide behind the word family just to deny the truth." Rachel deleted her post that same night, but not fast enough to outrun the truth spreading. 3 days later, Haley texted me. Rachel just got suspended. Parents filed complaints about her sharing false information publicly. The school's opening an internal investigation. I read it and sighed, not out of triumph. I didn't rejoice at seeing my sister pay the price for the truth she tried to bury. But I also didn't feel sadness. I had long grown used to how people crafted stories to cast themselves as the ones to pity. That evening, I sat at my table, staring at the photo of the sealed house. I didn't know what would happen next. I couldn't guess what my mother was thinking, or how my father would face this downfall. But I knew the cost of casting out the one who once kept the roof from caving in sometimes meant watching the whole house be taken away by arrogance and deceit itself. I didn't need to say another word. Each bill, each transfer, every night I sat in my small kitchen, balancing finances so they wouldn't freeze in winter, those were all speaking for me. And this time, people heard them. The next morning, snow fell thick across the path. My curtains swayed with drafts slipping through the cracks, but the room was warm from the steady hum of the heater. I had just set a pot of water on the stove for tea when the doorbell rang softly. Not hurried, not urgent, just hesitant rings, brief like the feeling I carried through childhood every time I waited for my mother to step into my room, only for her not to. I peeked through the crack. She stood there, quiet in a thick gray coat, scarf wrapped tight, an old dark knit cap pulled low. In her hands she carried a round tin, the same kind she once used for ginger cookies when I was little. I opened the door without a word. She looked at me, her eyes seeming older than the winters since I had last seen her. "Sorry for coming unannounced," she said, voice roughened by the cold. "But I don't know how much longer I could wait." I didn't reply. I just stepped aside, opening the door a little wider. "You can come in," I said softly. She walked in, snow-covered shoes leaving wet prints on the wooden floor. I took the tin from her hands, still warm from her touch, light in weight, yet heavier than any gift I had ever received. We sat at the small kitchen table. I poured tea, setting a mint green cup in front of her, the ones I always used for guests. She held it tight with both hands, as if the warmth was the only thing keeping her steady. The tin lay between us. I hadn't opened it. I didn't hurry. "I baked last night," she said, eyes fixed on the steam rising from her cup instead of me. "It's the old recipe, the one we used that Christmas Eve when your father worked the night shift," I remembered. The scent of ginger, molasses, and orange peel clung in my memory like a faded photograph. I was 11 then, apron too big, hands sticky with dough, and she had laughed, saying, "If you stir counterclockwise, the cookies will come out softer." I believed that for years. "Lily," she whispered my name, as if calling it with clarity. "If I had any part in all that happened, then today, I'm sorry. Not because of Rachel, not because of your father, but because I stayed silent for too long." I looked at her. She was truly older now, no longer the stern woman who always stepped back to preserve a false peace in the house. Now, just a mother sitting across from her daughter, hands trembling for more than one reason. I didn't cry. I only let out a quiet breath. "I'm not waiting for you to apologize," I said. My voice not cold, just steady and clear. "I only wish that in all those times you saw me being pushed aside, you had said something. Just once, that you had spoken up." My mother nodded. "I know. I remember there was a time you got up from the dinner table when your father praised Rachel in front of guests, but didn't mention you at all. You went to wash the dishes alone, and I just watched. I thought if I stayed quiet, things would pass more quickly. I was wrong." She lifted her hand, brushing the rim of her glass. "You weren't a child who needed to be spoiled, so I forgot. You also needed to be acknowledged. I don't know when I started choosing silence. Maybe it was when your father began raising his voice at Rachel, and I was afraid if I argued, things would get worse. Then I got used to it. I got used to staying silent as if it was the only way to keep everything from breaking apart." I gently opened the tin box. The scent of ginger cookies drifted into the air. Round, dark brown, the edges slightly burnt as always. Uneven, imperfect, but real. I took one, placed it on a plate, but didn't eat. "I know," she continued. "You've done more than anyone else in this family ever has. I know it was you who called the roofer, you who sent the money for the property taxes, you who paid the hospital bills when I was admitted that time." She looked up at me, her eyes wet and red. "And I never thanked you. I never hugged you. I never defended you. I stayed silent, because I was a coward." I picked up the cookie, broke it in half. Not for the taste, but because my hands needed something to do to keep me steady. I don't blame you, I answered softly. I just don't have room left inside me to carry what you didn't say. We sat in silence. In that moment, I wasn't the daughter clutching a lifetime of hurt anymore. I was just a woman, seeing her mother more clearly than ever before, not a model, not a mirror to follow, but a person who had been wrong and who was now trying to step closer, even if late. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, she finally said. I know I don't deserve it. But if you ever need someone to remember that you were here, that you were the little girl who made the best cookie dough I ever tasted, then today, I'm here. I stood, pouring more water into the teapot. The scent of cinnamon from the ginger cookies filled the kitchen. I'm not angry anymore, I said, as the hot water flowed. But I'm not the one holding this house together anymore either. I've stopped doing that. She nodded, her eyes blurred with tears. You don't need to anymore. I understand. I set the pot down on the table, saying nothing more. In the warmth of that kitchen on a snowy day, neither of us cried aloud, neither of us embraced. But something had slipped away soft, without form like the snow outside melting slowly under the rising sun. And I knew this. Meeting wasn't about repairing. It was about finally seeing each other as we really were. No hiding, no defenses. Just a mother and a daughter, after all these years, finally sitting together. No one left to apologize on someone else's behalf. No one left to justify anymore. The house on Ashwood Street had been sealed for nearly a month when I received an offer from a young family who had just moved into the city. They were a Mexican couple with 2 small children in elementary school. The husband worked at an auto repair shop, and the wife worked part-time at a bakery. They stood in front of that house, their eyes filled with both hope and worry. Ben asked me, "What price do you want to set? In its current condition, the market could pay more." I looked at the young couple. They didn't look like investors or flippers. They looked like I had once been just longing for a roof, a place to light up a dinner table and keep warm through winter. I said quietly, "Sell it for less, and leave the essential furniture. They'll need it more than I need the cash." Ben hesitated, then nodded. "I understand. I'll handle the paperwork." On the day of signing, I watched them hold the keys, their smiles bright and clear. The wife, teary-eyed, thanked me in her accented voice. "We will take care of this house. Thank you for giving us this chance." I didn't say much. I only wished them happiness, and inside I felt a heavy weight finally set down. That house had never been mine, not in memory. It was only a debt I had paid for others, a burden I carried to protect someone else. And now, it had the chance to become a real home for a new family. I moved into a small apartment by the lake, its balcony opening onto the water glittering in the late afternoon sun. Boston's lake was clear in late spring, with birds gliding across, and I felt reborn. The apartment wasn't large, but it was enough. A warm living room, a tidy little kitchen, a bedroom bright, with a wide window. No more heavy footsteps, no more strained silences at the dinner table. Just me, and the quiet I had chosen. Since moving there, I began thinking of a small project. After years in finance, I had seen so many middle-aged women, most of them single or divorced, struggling to manage their earnings. They reminded me of myself, hard-working, silently sacrificing, but never once daring to place their own worth equal to others. I reached out to the nearby community center, offering to run a free class. At first, only a few women came, then more. Every weekend, I sat with them, teaching how to make a budget, track expenses, tell the difference between needs and wants. But more than numbers, I shared my story. Not the bitter details, but the lesson. If you keep carrying everything in silence, one day, people will forget you were ever standing there. One woman, around 50, divorced after 30 years of marriage, broke down in the second session. She said, I thought I had nothing left. But hearing you, I feel like I can start again." I held her hand tightly and understood I wasn't just teaching. I was giving back to myself a faith I once lost. On quiet afternoons, I walked along the lake, Children laughed on the grass, couples sat on benches, and I strolled slowly, watching the sunlight ripple across the water. Sometimes, I brought a notebook and wrote a few lines. No longer lists of transfers or bills, just small words, light as breath, about the life I had chosen now. One late spring night, with the window open to a soft breeze, I sat at my desk under a warm lamp and opened a new notebook. I wrote, I am no longer the silent daughter. I am the woman who knows her worth. And I don't need anyone else to affirm it. I closed the notebook, set it on the table, and leaned back. Outside, the lake shimmered under the new moon, calm as a promise that my life had truly turned a page. I was no longer held by a cold house or by a name, scratched from a will. I was living in my own home, not made of brick and stone, but of boundaries and peace I had built myself. Freedom, I realized, isn't about leaving to escape. It's when you no longer need to stay just to prove you deserve a place. And from that moment, I was truly free. My life had closed a chapter filled with scars, but it also opened a door to peace I never thought I'd touch. I chose to rise, not to take revenge, but to prove to myself that a person's worth isn't in how others see them, it's in how they choose to treat themselves. And what about you? If you were in my place, would you choose forgiveness, walk away in silence, or stand and reclaim your voice? I believe everyone carries their own answer, and I would love to hear yours. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment, share your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel to join me for the next journeys. Because every family has its secrets. Every life holds pain and renewal. And he knows, maybe the next story will open a new way of seeing your own life.